White officer spits on black man. Then learns he's the new police chief. In the bustling precinct of Grandview, a small city surrounded by the serene Appalachian Mountains, an unexpected tale of accountability and redemption unfolds. At its core, this story reveals how prejudice and toxic culture can shatter trust and how integrity and courage can rebuild it. Dive into the story of a newly appointed police chief who steps into chaos, only to uncover truths that will change his department, and perhaps his city, forever. It was a humid Monday morning in late September when Miles Carter stepped out of his dusty old pickup truck. Dressed in a worn plaid shirt, faded jeans, and scuffed boots, he hardly looked like someone about to lead the Grandview Police Department. That was intentional. Miles, the department's newly appointed police chief, had a mission: to understand the precinct's dynamics without the veil of formal introductions or polished routines. Grandview was a quaint Appalachian town, but whispers of misconduct and poor community relations had plagued its police force for years. Miles, a black man with over 2 decades of experience in law enforcement, knew he was stepping into a storm. The town's population was skeptical of its law enforcement, and within the department, there were murmurs of discontent about his appointment. But none of that deterred him. Today, Miles was here to observe, not as a chief, but as just another face in the crowd. The precinct's parking lot was alive with activity, officers exchanging casual banter, shuffling papers, and greeting one another as they passed. Miles adjusted his baseball cap, took a deep breath, and walked toward the building. He entered through a side door, unnoticed by the groups of officers gathered around desks and the faint sound of phones ringing in the background. As he navigated the precinct's fluorescent-lit halls, Miles kept his head low, observing. Some officers were engrossed in paperwork, others swapped jokes over stale coffee. He noticed a few wary glances but kept moving, his aim to remain inconspicuous. "Hey, you!" A sharp voice cut through the room, drawing attention to Miles. He turned to see an officer striding toward him, his shoulders squared with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. The name, Officer Hayes, glinted on his badge. Behind Hayes, a small group of officers leaned casually against the wall, watching the encounter with amused smirks. "You lost, pal," Hayes sneered, his tone dripping with condescension. "This ain't the shelter. If you're looking for a handout, you're in the wrong place." Miles froze for a moment, caught between the urge to respond and the need to let this scene play out. Before he could say anything, Hayes stepped closer, his voice rising. "You heard me," he barked. "Get out of here. We don't need people like you hanging around." Laughter erupted from the small crowd behind Hayes. The humiliation in the air was palpable, but Miles kept his composure. As Hayes leaned in, the moment turned darker. Without warning, the officer spit directly into Miles' face. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The warm saliva trickling down his cheek was a visceral reminder of the toxicity he'd vowed to confront. Around him, laughter and jeers echoed louder, but Miles didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly reached into his pocket, pulled out a handkerchief, and wiped his face. "Is this how you treat everyone who walks through those doors?" Miles asked, his voice steady but firm. "Only the ones who don't belong here." Hayes shot back smugly, prompting another round of laughter. Miles said nothing more. He turned and walked toward the main office, his mind racing but his demeanor unshaken. Just as he reached the door, the intercom crackled to life, calling all personnel to the briefing room for a major announcement. As the officers began filing into the room, their jokes and jabs continued. Hayes, still grinning smugly, leaned against the wall, confident in his morning victory. Miles, meanwhile, adjusted his baseball cap and prepared for what was to come. The briefing room buzzed with chatter as officers filed in, some clutching coffee mugs, others sharing inside jokes. The atmosphere was light, almost celebratory, as the group waited for the morning's announcement. Miles stood at the side of the room, out of view, observing the energy in the space. Despite the toxic culture he'd witnessed just moments ago, there were glimpses of camaraderie, a foundation he knew could be rebuilt. At the front of the room, Captain Trevor Scott, a seasoned officer with a broad build and a streak of silver in his hair, cleared his throat to command attention. The room quieted as he addressed the group. "Good morning, everyone," Scott began. "As you all know, Chief Allen retired last month, and we've been awaiting his replacement. Well, today's the day. I'm honored to introduce you to our new Chief of Police. Someone with an outstanding record and a vision for the future of this department." Miles adjusted his posture and stepped forward. His boots echoed on the tile floor as he made his way to the front of the room. The officers who had been laughing and chatting moments ago fell silent, their expressions ranging from curiosity to confusion. Hayes's smirk froze mid-laugh. His face drained of color as recognition dawned. The man he'd mocked, spat on, and dismissed as a nobody was now standing at the podium, commanding the room's attention. "Good morning," Miles began, his deep voice calm yet authoritative. "My name is Miles Carter, and as of today, I am your new Chief of Police." The silence that followed was deafening. Miles let it linger for a moment, scanning the room and locking eyes with several officers, including Hayes. The tension was palpable, and Hayes shifted uncomfortably, his once confident demeanor now replaced with visible unease. "I came here this morning dressed like this." Miles gestured to his casual attire. "Because I wanted to see this department through an unfiltered lens. I wanted to understand its culture, not just in meetings or formal introductions, but in the moments when no one is putting on a show." A murmur rippled through the room, but Miles raised a hand to silence it. "What I witnessed was eye-opening," he continued. "It was a reflection of why this department struggles to earn the trust of the community it serves. And let me be clear, that ends today." Miles' words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Hayes, now visibly sweating, avoided eye contact, staring at the floor as though willing it to swallow him whole. "Respect," Miles said, his voice steady, "is not optional. It is the foundation of our work as law enforcement officers. Without it, we fail, not just each other, but the people we've sworn to protect." Miles paused, letting the weight of his statement sink in. The room remained eerily quiet, the officers sitting rigidly in their seats. "This morning," Miles continued, his gaze fixed on Hayes, "some of you found it amusing to degrade and humiliate what you believed was just another powerless man. Let me remind you, every person who walks through these doors deserves respect, whether they wear a badge or not." The officers exchanged uneasy glances, the earlier smugness and laughter now replaced by guilt and discomfort. Miles stepped closer to the edge of the podium, his presence commanding. "Officer Hayes," Miles said, his tone sharp. The room collectively held its breath as Hayes looked up, his face red and his jaw clenched. "You," Miles continued, "represent everything that is broken in this department. When you spat on me, it wasn't just me you disrespected, it was the badge, the oath we take, and the community we serve." "Chief, Hayes stammered, his voice barely audible. "That's the problem," Miles interrupted. "You didn't care to know who I was. You didn't think before you acted because you assumed that I didn't matter. And that assumption is why we've lost the trust of the very people we're here to protect." The room was silent as Miles turned his attention back to the group. "This isn't just about one officer," he said. "What I witnessed was a culture where bullying and prejudice are tolerated, even celebrated. That stops now." Miles stepped away from the podium and began walking slowly through the room, his gaze sweeping over each officer. "I understand that change is difficult," he said, "but let me be clear. There will be no tolerance for behavior that disrespects the dignity of anyone, whether they are a colleague, a civilian, or anyone else." He returned to the front of the room, his voice rising slightly. "Effective immediately. Officer Hayes is suspended pending an internal investigation," Miles announced. Gasps rippled through the room, and Hayes's face turned crimson as he clenched his fists. "And for those of you who think this is just a slap on the wrist," Miles continued, "think again. This is the first of many changes. If you're not willing to rise to the standard of integrity and respect, this isn't the place for you." The meeting ended in heavy silence, officers shuffling out of the room without their usual chatter. Miles remained at the podium, watching as Hayes stormed out, his face a mix of embarrassment and anger. In that moment, Miles knew he'd made an impact. It was only the beginning of the battle, but for the first time, the toxic culture of the precinct had been challenged. The weeks following Miles Carter's dramatic first day as police chief were anything but quiet. The precinct was buzzing, not with jokes or casual banter, but with tension and whispers. Officer Hayes's suspension had sent shockwaves through the department, and the announcement of an internal investigation into his conduct left many officers questioning their own actions. Miles, however, wasn't focused on the murmurs. His priority was clear: rebuilding the culture from the ground up. He began his mission by walking the precinct every morning, greeting officers and staff alike, making his presence felt. He wanted everyone to know he wasn't just a title behind a desk, he was there to lead by example. Some officers, like Officer Lisa Marino, a young and ambitious recruit, found Miles' leadership inspiring. One morning, she stopped him in the hallway, her voice trembling with both fear and determination. "Chief Carter," she began, "I've been here for 2 years. And I'm ashamed to admit that I've stayed silent about things I've seen. I was afraid of retaliation." Miles looked at her, his expression firm but kind. "Acknowledging the problem is the first step, Officer Marino. The next step is deciding what you're going to do about it." "I want to do better," she said earnestly. "I want to be part of the solution. That's all I ask," Miles replied. "It starts with you." Not everyone, however, was eager to embrace change. Hayes filed an appeal against his suspension, claiming unfair treatment. He attempted to rally support from other officers, but Miles had anticipated such resistance. The investigation into Hayes's past revealed a disturbing pattern of complaints, excessive force, inappropriate comments, and a blatant disregard for protocol. Miles made the findings public within the precinct, ensuring transparency. Hayes's appeal was swiftly denied, and Miles stood firm in his decision. Meanwhile, Miles worked tirelessly to introduce new policies aimed at fostering respect and accountability. Mandatory training sessions on implicit bias and community relations were met with mixed reactions. Some officers resisted, grumbling about political correctness, while others embraced the opportunity to grow. One afternoon, during a session on implicit bias, a veteran officer named Greg Simmons raised his hand. "Chief," he said, his tone skeptical, "how do you expect us to protect the community when the community doesn't trust us?" Miles stepped forward, his gaze steady. "Trust isn't given, it's earned. He replied, "And it starts with us. If we want the community to see us differently, we have to show them that we're worthy of that trust. That means holding ourselves to the highest standard, even when it's inconvenient." The room fell silent, Simmons nodding slowly. For the first time, it seemed the message was beginning to resonate. As the precinct's culture began to shift, so did the community's perception of its officers. Miles made it a point to attend local events, meet with residents, and listen to their concerns. One Saturday morning, he found himself at a community block party, surrounded by families, children, and local business owners. A young boy, no older than 10, cautiously approached Miles, his wide eyes filled with curiosity. "Are you really the chief?" the boy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am," Miles said, crouching down to meet the boy's gaze. "My dad says the police don't care about us," the boy said, his words a mix of innocence and sadness. Miles took a deep breath, the weight of the boy's statement hitting him hard. "I can't change what's happened in the past," he said gently, "but I promise you, we're working to do better. If you ever need help, you come find me." "Okay," the boy nodded, a small smile breaking across his face. By the end of Miles' first year as chief, the precinct was undeniably different. Officers who couldn't adapt to the new standards had been replaced with recruits who shared Miles' vision for integrity and respect. The laughter and camaraderie that once thrived at the expense of others had transformed into genuine support and teamwork. The community, once skeptical, began to see signs of change. Complaints against officers decreased, and acts of kindness, officers helping with local cleanups or mentoring at-risk youth, became more common. One evening, as the sun set over Grandview, Miles stood in the precinct's main hallway, watching officers file out after their shifts. The weight of his mission still pressed on his shoulders. But for the first time, he felt hope. Change was never easy, and the road ahead was long. But every step forward was worth it. As Miles turned to head back to his office, Captain Scott approached him. "Chief," Scott said, his voice thoughtful, "I've been with this department for 30 years. And I've never seen anything like what you've done here. You've shaken this place to its core. But it needed shaking." Miles nodded, his expression serious but grateful. "We're not done yet," he replied. "This is just the beginning." With that, Miles returned to his office, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Grandview was far from perfect, but it was moving in the right direction, and that was all the motivation he needed. The story of Chief Miles Carter is a powerful reminder that change begins with courage and a commitment to doing what's right, even when it's difficult. His journey in Grandview shows us that standing up against prejudice and toxic cultures isn't just about enforcing rules, it's about rebuilding trust, fostering respect, and making a lasting impact on the lives of others. In both America and Europe, where diversity and community values are at the heart of society, stories like this resonate deeply. They inspire us to reflect on our own actions and encourage us to build connections rooted in empathy and understanding. As we close this chapter, we're reminded that leadership isn't about titles or power, it's about serving with integrity, holding ourselves accountable, and creating a better future for everyone. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more compelling stories like this to life. By subscribing, you'll get free access to the latest and greatest tales of hope, resilience, and transformation. Click the subscribe button now, and join us as we continue to share stories that spark conversation and inspire change. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.